All right, this evening we're going to be looking at that of ordinary people who are called to an extraordinary purpose. And from the prayer, that God can use anyone He wants to. And even those who may say they have nothing special to give, even those who are God's enemies, God can use them in ways they can't even figure out, in ways they have no idea they are helping Him. But God can use people, and He can use ordinary people, and that He calls them to an extraordinary purpose. And we want to look at some positives before we look at a negative in all this. But God can do it. God can in fact, there is, if we look at the people who are in this list, there's nothing unusual about them except that they're about to do something extraordinary. They are brought to a purpose, and a purpose that they would not have set for themselves. They wouldn't have the imagination to think it, or just not thinking that they could do such a thing or that they should do such a thing. But God brings them, just basically ordinary people. And if we were able to go back and meet these people we're about to talk about, really I don't think we would be overwhelmed by their personality or overwhelmed by anything. They would seem to just be ordinary folk. That's all they would be, just ordinary folks. And God can use what we think is common, what we think is ordinary, what we even think is substandard, and He can do extraordinary things with that, with us. And we just start this with, some may never know what they did. They may have no idea what they did, but God used them. And God used them in a way that they received no benefit from it necessarily, no honor from it among men. No, because no one knew they did it, but someone did it, and God brought it about that it would be done. We go to 1 Kings 22, verse 34. Now a certain man drew a bow at random and struck the king of Israel between the joints of his armor. So he said to the driver of his chariot, this would be Ahab, turn around and take me out of the battle, for I am wounded. God actually told Ahab that if he went up to this battle, he would not return. He'd not return. Not alive. Now his body would be brought back, but he wouldn't return alive. And he used a prophet by the name of Micaiah to deliver that message to him. And also deliver the message that among these other false prophets, these prophets of Baal and whatnot, that there is a lying spirit that's been sent to them, and they are the ones telling you to go on up. They're the ones telling you there's going to be a victory. But God, through His prophet, is telling Ahab, you go up there, you're going to die. Now what does that mean? Well, it means just that, but it also means Ahab had a choice. Ahab could decide, I'm not going up there. I would like to live. And Ahab would have lived. He wouldn't have died at that battle. I mean, eventually he would have died, but not at that battle. He would have at least survived that day. But there's a certain man on the opposite side, a certain man among the archers, and in the battles in ancient warfare concerning archers, you could have hundreds or perhaps even thousands of arrows in the air at a single moment, where one archer couldn't really know where his arrows landed. They're just lobbing them into the mass of the enemy is what they're doing, in the hopes of killing some and stopping the brunt of this attack as much as they can. But here is a certain man, and I dare say he probably had no idea who he was or what he did. No idea what he did. That he is the one that actually killed the king of Israel. He killed Ahab by an arrow that goes in between the joints of Ahab's armor. And this man, if what he did had been known among his own officers, from his own king, that he would have received some kind of honor. But God is using someone to do something. They may have no idea what they just did. Have no idea at all. God can do that. God also can see in us what we don't see in ourselves. God can see someone who can do great things. Someone who can do something at the moment they don't even imagine that it can be done, or even think that it should be done. And they're on their path of doing something else entirely. They may consider themselves to be the wrong choice in the matter, but God sees in us what we do not see. We go to Exodus chapter 3, beginning in verse 11. Exodus chapter 3, beginning in verse 1. Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the back of the desert and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire from the midst of a bush. So he looked, and behold, the bush was burning with fire, but the bush was not consumed. Then Moses said, I will now turn aside and see this great sight, why the bush does not burn. So when the Lord saw that he turned aside to look, God called to him from the midst of the bush and said, Moses, Moses. And he said, Here I am. Then he said, Do not draw near this place. Take your sandals off your feet, for the place where you stand is holy ground. Moreover, he said, I am the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look upon God. And the Lord said, I have surely seen the oppression of my people who are in Egypt, and have heard their cry because of their taskmasters, for I know their sorrows. So I have come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up from that land to a good and large land, to a land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the Canaanites and the Hittites and the Amorites and the Perizzites and the Hivites and the Jebusites. Now therefore, behold, the cry of the children of Israel has come to me, and I have also seen the oppression with which the Egyptians oppress them. All right, up to this point, we have Moses standing before this burning bush and speaking out of the burning bush. God is speaking to him and explaining to him what he's about to do, explaining that he has seen the oppression that Israel has been going through in Egypt. So he knows the sorrow. He knows their taskmasters. He knows what's been going on, and he is going to deliver them. And he is also going to fulfill his promise that he gave to Abraham. And it was actually to the children of Abraham, to Abraham's descendants. There was a land promise, and God is about to fulfill it. All that is good news. All of it is extremely good news. And Moses might have been wondering, okay, why are you telling me? Here we are all the way in the wilderness, way away from Egypt. I've been tending my father-in-law's sheep. He's now 80 years old, Moses is. And he could now wonder, well, that is really great news. But why are you telling me? That is all significant. Come now, therefore, I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. Now he knows why God is speaking to him in this matter. Now he knows that God has chosen him to be the deliverer. God has chosen him to, actually, his life is going to be Moses' life is going to be completely changed. Moses, for 80 years, has been prepped for this job. Did he know Egyptian society inside and out? Did he know anything about the royals of Egypt inside and out? That's where he was raised. He spent the first 40 years of his life there. When he left, he was 40 years old. He was born there, raised among the royals as a grandson of Pharaoh. He had rights and he had privileges. He had all kinds of doors open for him as far as things in Egypt were concerned, but he was willing to give all that up. And we see actually in Hebrews chapter 11 that being discussed, that Moses would rather take the reproach of Christ, rather choose that than the passing pleasures of Egypt. He'd rather do that. That shows a spiritual maturity. That shows that God has in fact chosen the right man. But the right man doesn't think he's the right man. He doesn't think that. And he has resigned himself to just doing what he's been doing for the past 40 years, living in the wilderness, basically in exile out of Egypt. He can't go back because he's afraid that he would be punished for doing so. Verse 11, but Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh? Who am I? And that I should bring the children of Israel out of Egypt. Who am I? All right, it comes down to this. Moses, really? You're nothing. Until God brings you to a purpose. It comes down to that. He's been prepped for it. He can do it. And God is going to bring him, going to help him every step of the way. But is Moses sometimes, often, people of the past, they become legends. They're made into something other than what we are. They die and they're made into legends. And as time progresses, there are more and more and more things said about them. Now, the Bible never does that. The Bible doesn't present anyone in the text as some kind of legendary hero, as someone who is made out of iron or made out of stainless steel or made out of marble. Doesn't present them that way at all. Presents them that they're just people. There's nothing different between you and me and Moses. There's nothing different at all. It's just he's chosen to do this, and we're coming centuries way too late. There's nothing different whatsoever. But Moses does not see in himself what God sees. God sees something that Moses cannot see in himself, and God is going to, in fact, use him. He's going to use him. And Moses is going to be really the greatest leader Israel would ever have until the Christ. Now, Moses was never king. And one could make an argument that David was just as great as Moses, but Moses doesn't make the same mistakes that David did. And yes, Moses didn't have to go through the same things that David did, and vice versa. But Moses is going to be the beginning of the writing prophets. Genesis to Deuteronomy are going to be penned by him in his lifetime. In these last 40 years of his life, he's going to write those down. And you have the law of Moses, and it's called the law of Moses. In the book of Revelation, we see where in heaven they are singing the song of Moses and the Lamb. That shows an importance that is there. In Luke chapter 16, Abraham, speaking to the rich man, says, they have Moses and the prophets. Let them hear them. But if they won't hear them, neither will they hear though one came back from the dead. Moses is going to be a significant person, but Moses doesn't think that way of himself. But let God be in control. Let God do what He wants to do. Follow His plan for you, and there is something greater still. There is something great. Now, we come to this. God sees in us what others do not see. Even when we can't see it in ourselves, there can be times when other people don't see it either. Let's go, before we do this, let's go to 1 Corinthians chapter 1. 1 Corinthians chapter 1. Verse 18, for the message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise and bring to nothing the understanding of the prudent. Where is the wise? Where is the scribe? Where is the disputer of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of this world? And the answer to that last question is yes, He has. Now, going back to Moses, if Moses was some sort of just arrogant, bombastic man, that would be kind of hard to have him as leading Israel out of Egypt. But what if he's meek? What if he sees himself as ordinary? Is there not strength in that? There is strength in that. And knowing that you're ordinary, but that God can bring you to something extraordinary, and following Him, then that's faith. That's putting a proper perspective on yourself and a proper perspective on God. That is faith and humility in faith. But God sees in us what others do not see. And we just bring here Levi or Matthew. After these things, Luke 5, verse 27 and 28, after these things he went out and saw a tax collector named Levi sitting at the tax office, and he, that is Jesus, said to him, follow me. Follow me. So he left all, rose up, and followed him. It's that simple. Now, in our class in Mark, we discussed this, that Matthew or Levi, this isn't the first time he's seen Jesus. This is not the first time. And so it would seem very strange if this stranger, Jesus of Nazareth, just walked into the tax office and said, follow me, and Matthew or Levi has no idea who this is and just follows him. No, he knows who he is. But the point we want to make in this is a tax collector. Just being around tax collectors can lose you a lot of political points inside Jerusalem and in Jewish society. It can lose you a lot of points of people thinking that you are some kind of pawn of Rome, or you are a sympathizer of Rome, that somehow you are disloyal to the Jewish people. But Jesus is going to He's going to choose a tax collector to be one of His apostles. And this tax collector is actually going to write one of the Gospels. He's going to do it. And if we were to look at the others of who is Luke to write a Gospel, he's a Gentile, for crying out loud. And he writes the book of Acts. Who is John? John's just a fisherman. Who is Mark? Mark would seem to be you talk about common or just lackluster as anybody else. He would be. He would be. But here, Jesus sees something in the man that others wouldn't see. He sees something in here. He has an occupation that's terribly unpopular. And there is a segment of Jewish society, small though it may have been, who would have killed and did kill men like Levi. They did do it because they saw them as being, as I said, just being used by a foreign power, used by the Roman Empire. Jesus is going to use Matthew for much greater things. God sees you perfect for the job, and it can be something, it can be a job that's the complete opposite of what you've been doing. And I do mean the complete opposite. God can see a perfect candidate in you of there is something I would like you to do that not only are you not doing it, you're running counter to it. And we see this. This would be that of Saul of Tarsus, but this is Jesus speaking to Ananias, and this is Jesus not on the earth anymore. Then Ananias answered, Lord, I have heard from many about this man, that's Saul of Tarsus, how much harm he has done to your saints in Jerusalem. His reputation is known. And here he has authority from the chief priest to bind all who call on your name. To Ananias, Saul of Tarsus, you want me to do what? Concerning Saul of Tarsus, I'm to do what? But the Lord said to him, Go, for he is a chosen vessel of mine to bear my name before Gentiles, kings, and the children of Israel. You're choosing what, someone like Ananias or anybody else could have listed about 50 names before they would have thought of Saul of Tarsus. Not more like thousands of names before they would have thought of Saul of Tarsus, who could have done this, who should have. What's wrong with Barnabas? Why not use him? What's wrong with me, Ananias? What's wrong with me? I could do this. But of course, Ananias doesn't have that issue. He's not thinking that way, but he is thinking of this man has been persecuting the church, and what are we doing? And God says that, yes, Saul of Tarsus is a chosen vessel of mine. And these are the things he's going to be doing. He's going to bear my name before the Gentiles, before kings, and the children of Israel. He's going to do that. And in the life of Paul, as we see, the book of Acts showing some of it, but also his letters showing other parts, that is what he's going to be doing. He is going to do that. But who would have seen that, such a thing? And we have God calling him to do the opposite of what he's been doing. He's been persecuting the church. Now it's time to turn that around. And he's going to be preaching the thing that he's been persecuting. God uses us in our weakness. He can definitely do this. And this does concern that of Paul. 2 Corinthians 12, 7 through 10. And lest I should be exalted above measure by the abundance of revelations, a thorn in the flesh was given to me, a messenger of Satan to buffet me, lest I be exalted above measure. And this is a very good attitude. He's not angry. A thorn in the flesh has been given him. And he could be resentful about that. He could see that as being this problem that just doesn't go away, this problem that hampers him, this problem that makes things less than ideal, whatever it is. And I'm not going to pretend that I know what his thorn in the flesh is, because I don't. The text doesn't say. And anybody who says they know, they're guessing. I mean, they may be right, but they're just guessing. They don't really know. But his thorn in the flesh, whatever it was, he says it's a message of Satan to buffet me, and it is to keep him level-headed about himself. It's to keep himself level-headed. Concerning this thing, I pleaded with the Lord 3 times that it might depart from me. And he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. His strength is made perfect in weakness. You would take a man who's just, there's nothing extraordinary in the, let's just say, the physicality of Paul or the intelligence of Paul or the academic achievements of Paul. Concerning the Gentile world especially, it'd be seen as just backwater kind of mentality coming out of Palestine. His teachers, Gamaliel, they wouldn't have respected that in the least. A Pharisee, they definitely wouldn't have respected that. A Jew who's just from a very strange nation of strange people. And isn't that enough? Well, he is saying, my strength is made perfect in weakness, where he can take a man like Saul of Tarsus and even with this thorn in the flesh, show his power even more. Show his strength even more, that it's perfected in weakness. Therefore, most gladly I will rather boast in my infirmities, that the power of Christ may rest on me. Therefore I take pleasure in infirmities, in reproaches, in needs, in persecutions, in distresses for Christ's sake. For when I am weak, then I am strong. Just this morning we spoke about that of persecutions. We spoke of that of tribulation. And he says that he has pleasure in the reproaches, in the needs, in the persecutions, in the distresses. If it's all for Christ's sake, he does. And that's okay. He is seeing clearly through what we can call the dust and the haze. He's seeing clearly through all the fabricated lies and all the things that are made in this world to try to keep us all in check, to try to keep us from fulfilling what Christ wants us to fulfill. He's seeing clearly through that and seeing that God has in fact brought him up from, well, being an enemy to being a friend and a brother and a child of God and someone that is used even in weakness and in an increasing weakness. God does it. God has been doing that. God uses our weaknesses to demonstrate his power. And part of that we have seen from Paul. But let's just look John 9, beginning in verse 1. Now as Jesus passed by, he saw a man who was blind from birth. And his disciples asked him, saying, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Okay. Now Jesus is going to answer this question. And, you know, we can learn a lot about the disciples by the questions they ask and by the things that they say. And Jesus is going to make corrections. We can learn that they haven't learned everything. And of course they haven't. New Testament doesn't even exist yet. Jesus, the full law of Christ and the full truth that Christ is going to bring didn't exist at that point. Jesus has to prepare them bit by bit by bit and then bring it about up to a certain point, then ascend into heaven, and the Holy Spirit is going to guide them then into all truth. Things that they could not understand, things that he said they could not bear then. It was more than they could understand. It was more than they could comprehend, because there are certain things they had to learn. But here, they're just asking a simple question, and it's not a dumb question. It's not a dumb question. He's not going to address it as a dumb question, but it is a question. Rabbi, who sinned? This man who's blind, this must be a punishment from God. Now, reading the book of Job, one can find out that such things don't necessarily happen. While someone could be punished for bad behavior, that is true. But just because someone has a hardship doesn't mean that it is punishment. And just like with Paul, Paul's the thorn in the flesh that he had, whatever that was, isn't a punishment, but it does keep him level-headed, as we said. Who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? They know he was born blind. Who said, well, how did he sin? How did the man sin to be born blind? What did he do that as an unborn child that would lead to him being born blind? And Jesus is going to just make a correction. Jesus answered, neither this man nor his parents sinned. That's not the reason he's blind. That's not the reason. But that the works of God should be revealed in him. Jesus is going to show the work of God through the blind man. Now let's just take a couple of points in this. One is Jesus healed him. And it brings about, it's just a simple thing. It's a miracle, yes, but it's just a simple act as far as what Jesus is able to do. He's been healing the blind. But he heals the blind man, and it brings about a series of reactions. It's like Jesus just pushed the first domino over, and the other dominoes just fall and fall and fall and fall. And we can see in that one chapter of John chapter 9 of where a man who's literally blind can now see, and men who can see become willfully blind. They don't want to see. They want to try to prove that no miracle was done. They want to try to prove that this man is lying. He was never blind. They are just willfully blind, and all others can see what occurred. It is the power of God, and God has enemies in some powerful places. Not more powerful than he is, but he's got some enemies where one would think there wouldn't be any enemies. Why would there be enemies? The very people who are opposing Christ would be some of those who had been preaching concerning the Messiah. All their life they had heard about it, learned about it, and some of them teaching about it, and yet here they are rejecting the Messiah that they've been teaching about and reading about and studying about. Here they are rejecting him. Yet it would be plain to your basic person what just happened, and that the work of God is shown in this. The glory of God is shown in this, and in the process his enemies are shown by how much they can actually deny. How far will they go to overlook something? How far will they go to just accept whatever lie they want as long as it denies Christ? They don't care what the lie is. As long as it denies Christ, they're good with it. And here is this extraordinary event that all should be glorifying God. And some are. But then again, some want to make themselves perpetual enemies of God. Now, we go to our negative example in this. That someone who wouldn't want to be used in the purposes of God, wouldn't want to be used, would want to prove God wrong, is someone who is in fact proving God right. Someone who doesn't want to help God in any way is just like with you have those rulers, that Sanhedrin court there in John chapter 9. They don't want to be helpful to Christ. They don't want to do that. They want to deny him as much as possible. Now we have a person going back to Exodus. Here is someone who can be used. God can use our wickedness to demonstrate his glory. That doesn't make the wickedness good. It's just that even in our rebellion, God can use us, and we prove that he's right when we don't want to. Exodus 3 and verse 18, then they will heed your voice, and you shall come. Isn't God speaking to Moses? They will heed your voice, and you shall come, you and the elders of Israel, to the king of Egypt, and you shall say to him, the Lord God of the Hebrews has met with us, and now please let us go 3 days' journey into the wilderness, that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God. But notice what God says. But I am sure that the king of Egypt will not let you go. No, not even by a mighty hand. He's not going to do it. He knows who's Pharaoh. He knows what's in that man's heart. He knows how absolutely hard-hearted the man is, how stubborn he is, how just as someone that is unwilling to move. And that's the sort of person that God is going to deal with. And that's the sort of person that thinks he can defeat God. And the reason I'm laughing is plague after plague after plague. What does he think? What does Pharaoh think is going to happen? You're going to tire out Jehovah? What does he think is going to happen? Bit by bit, the power of Egypt is being destroyed. It's being dismantled. It's being taken away to where at the end of it all, it doesn't even have an army. Well, it's drowned in the bottom of the Red Sea. It doesn't even have an army anymore. It's decimated. What does he think is going to happen? After seeing the first plague, one would have to say, this is going to be a problem. We cannot survive this. This is power beyond anything we've ever seen before. And no amount of praying to Ra is going to change it. No amount of praying to any other Egyptian god is going to change it. Pray to whomever you want to, but Jehovah's going to have his way. Jehovah's going to do it. And he's going to use this man to show his power to where the Egyptian people witness it, and they want the Pharaoh to let them go. Pharaoh was bound to have been extremely unpopular with his own people. Extremely unpopular. Now, he's still Pharaoh, but the people of Egypt were ready for Israel to go. Israel is going to see it. And the news is going to spread in the world to where Rahab, 40 years later, can recite what occurred in Egypt 40 years earlier. She knew. She didn't witness it. She's not even Egyptian. But she, miles away in Jericho, she knows what's happened. And she knows it's the God of Israel that did it. And she probably knows his name, because that would have traveled as well. Now, verse 20, so I will stretch out my hand and strike Egypt with all my wonders, which I will do in its midst. After that he will let you go, and I will give this people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, and it will be, it shall be, when you go, that you shall not go empty-handed. You're not going to go empty-handed. They are going to want you gone. As much as Pharaoh wants you to stay, and he's willing to have others die and everyone inconvenienced to keep Israel, there comes a point when, and it's the death of the firstborn, that momentarily, well, it's a moment of time that's a bit broader than the other ones, of where he agreed, yeah, I'll let the people go, and then changed his mind almost immediately. But here's this little more space of time when he agreed, yeah, they can go. And it's only when he thinks in his heart, and this is God's last play on this Pharaoh, that Pharaoh thinks the land has confused the people. And such an arrogant man that just isn't looking at reality. He's just been blinded by his rage or disappointment or just his own stubbornness. Instead of putting everything together, he's in his mind, the people, their God, if their God can't guide them in the right direction, if he has put them where he has put them, then he can't be much of anything. Well, did you forget the death of the firstborn? Did you forget water to blood? Did you forget the darkness? Did you forget all of those other things, the disease of the cattle? Did you forget all those things that he managed to do? So he's taking them in a wrong direction. And so that would be Pharaoh, goes to go get them back. And it's the one last victory over Pharaoh. And there'll be no one coming back. No one's going to come back from that. They're all going to end up in the bottom of the Red Sea. And that is that. God uses ordinary people, and he calls us all of us ordinary people, to extraordinary things. And things that we may not think we can do, having a low estimation of ourselves, but God has a higher estimation of us. That we may think of ourselves as being incapable, that we don't have the proper talents, that we don't have the proper training, that we don't have the proper something, but we may be absolutely wrong. Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh? God knew who he was picking. God knew who he was choosing. And there are things, there are tasks that we are called to do. Tasks that God knows, our Savior knows we can do it. And we are called to do those things. God makes us into better people. Much better people. And the Bible has had such a significant influence over this world that I can't even list them all. There's too many. When I just begin to think on it, it's one thing after another, after another, after another, after another, and just keeps going on, of knowledge that we gain from the Bible that gives us a better life, completely better life. And as we discussed this morning, the world opposes this. The world opposes his church. But let's see clearly, as we can see in the writings of Paul, see clearly that the things of this world don't matter. Eternity matters. Obedience to God, that matters. And regardless of what may occur, we continue on. And whatever we have been called to do, that's what we must be doing. We can think just very, very briefly of the parable of the talents, of the master going away. One servant's given 5 talents, one servant's given 2 talents, and the last servant is given 1 talent. Each of them was to use what they were given. Each of them was. But one of them didn't. And I've often wondered, in all the time that the master was away, of him hoping through all that time that when the master returned, he would be okay that he did not use his talent. Having sleepless nights, perhaps, these thoughts coming in throughout the years, I hope he'll be okay that I'm not using the talent given me. Well, the answer to that is he wasn't happy with it. Matter of fact, he calls him wicked and lazy. What would have been the result if Paul had refused? Paul would have died in his sins. What would have happened if Moses had refused? Well, God would have brought another way of delivering Egypt, and we wouldn't know a thing about it. But God calls us to a greater purpose and something that we can put our lives toward, and it makes for us to be better people. As we often say, these words are given for a reason, and these words correct lives. They improve lives. They improve character. They improve everything about us. It is meant for everything that is good for us. Everything. And this evening we need to look at our own lives. Are we ready for judgment? Are we ready? Let's not assume we've got another day, because that's not been assured. Are we ready? If we can help you in any way, we ask that you come as we stand and sing.